He's John Timpane.
And he's Don Rooney.
And this is
The Musical Innertube.
Now, you may ask, why is this podcast called The Musical Innertube?
And we may reply, because that's its name, of course.
Now, how did this podcast get that name?
Back in college, we hosted a radio show. Once, we tried to introduce a soothing musical interlude.
Instead, we messed up and wound up introducing a soothing musical inner tube, and the name stuck.
So here we are, hundreds of years later, still talking
to interesting people about their interesting lives.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Dava Sobel, the former science reporter for the New York Times, has made a career of writing wonderful, humane, readable books about science. Since August 2020, Dava has been editing a column for Scientific American called Meter, which publishes a contemporary poem she has selected involving some aspect of science. Full disclosure, mine is a Scientific American family. My wife, the canny and superlative Christy Keller, is the copy chief at Scientific American. As for Dava, we hear she has an asteroid named after her and is a longtime chaser after solar eclipses. We'll have to ask her about that. Welcome to the Musical Innertube, Dava Sobel.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
So, to begin, how did you get roped into this gig? And what has the experience curating Meter been like so far?
I am happy to say that I roped the magazine in instead of the other way around. I learned that Scientific American, in its very earliest iteration, published poetry in every issue. This was back in the 1800s. And it occurred to me that it would be nice if they revived that tradition. I have had a special love of poetry about science for about 40 years, and I've collected a lot of it. And my thought was that I would mine this collection, if allowed, for the magazine, and maybe link each poem to something current in scientific research, and maybe write an accompanying paragraph or so. So I took the idea to the magazine. I started with Clara Moskowitz, the senior editor for Space and Physics, because years before, when Clara was a science writing student, she had called to interview me for some class essay. And I remembered her, and then some years later, she showed up at the launch of one of my books, and she was now at Scientific American, which was just terrific. And then I'd also seen her at a couple of meetings, and she was the only person I knew on the staff. And then she liked the idea, but went higher. Curtis Brainerd was the acting executive editor, and they invited me to come in to have a meeting and discuss it. This was probably September of 2019. We actually had the first column in January of 2020. And I prepared all weekend for this meeting. And then when I got there, it seemed they were all for it. I didn't have to convince anybody of anything. And Curtis had come up with the name Meter for the column, which I thought was perfect. I still think it's the perfect name for the title. And he was not at all interested in my 40-year haul of science poems. He said, no, we want all new poems.
Wow. So that was Curtis who said that.
Wow. Totally different. Wow. So it's September. And as you know, John, the magazine works very far in advance.
Yes, it does.
So I said, well, the only way I could possibly get an original poem for the January issue would be to call my longtime good friend Diane Ackerman and ask her to write something. And they said, oh, that would be fine. So that's what I did. And she came through, and we've just been rolling ever since.
The way it's set up now, Dava, do you commission the poems? And also, I noticed that some of them are illustrated and that sort of thing. Do you do all of that and then deliver it to the magazine, or is there some sort of a give and take?
I do all the commissioning. but I also do all the receiving of the unsolicited poems, because I want to tell you the poets of the world have been waiting for this opportunity. And I get a large number of poems from all sorts of people. The first one came from a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, Forrest Gander.
Oh, sure.
Just heard about it and sent me a poem, and it was gorgeous. But I also hear from would-be poets. And I recently got a letter from a high school student in India with a poem. And she said the most wonderful thing. This is an aspiring astrophysicist. She said she'd never realized that there could be a connection between science and poetry until she saw the meter column. And that just, I'll float on that for a couple of months, I think.
You know, it's interesting because what she's saying goes back to your taste and a shared taste that I share with you for poetry that has either science as a topic or has the sensibility of science operating within it. I mean, there has been, depending on how you want to define such things, science has been a topic in poetry for hundreds of years.
Oh, yes.
And I think
I would even say longer than that.
Yes, of course. And yet people do not generally connect the two. And I wonder why that is. You know, I often wonder why that is, because poets have to pay attention. That's the first thing they have to do. We have to be detail-oriented and concrete and get a sense of things. And of course, we have to know about language and dwell within language. But still, people don't think of poetry as being tuned to science. I wonder if you've gotten any mail or people have spoken to you about that.
Most of the mail I get comes from people who very much see the connection, feel the connection. Also, some of the contributors to the column have been scientists.
Yes, I noticed that.
So it works that way too.
Sure.
But to answer Don's question, I do not have anything to do with the illustration. So I turn in the poem and a little biographical note about the poet. And then Michael Mrack at the magazine and his staff in the art department look for, I don't even know who does this, but they look for the appropriate image. Once, I believe they commissioned artwork, but usually they find something that is just the perfect already existing image. And it's usually a couple of months after I turn in the poem that I see a first proof of what the page will look like. And I'm invariably thrilled.
Well, of course, you have a magazine which has based much of its prestige on the artwork. People forget that it's a richly illustrated magazine, and it has to be spot on. It has to be right. This is science.
Yes.
This is science after all. And yet there's much of it that has to do with the imagination and with the fancy, because science engages that, of course.
Yeah.
And
there was one case where the poem was about geology. This was a poet named Janet McFadden.
Yeah.
And her husband's a geologist. So she had photographs of the site that she wrote about, and she sent me those. But the quality of the photographs was not up to the standards of the magazine. So they did something else instead that had more color, more artistry.
I'm thinking, too, about studies that I've read that say people who play a musical instrument, are also very good at mathematics, that there is an intertwining between the two. And the push towards STEM education in schools now, of science, technology, engineering, and math, A lot of people have added an A to make it STEAM, to put the arts in there, because they think the arts also are something that should be entwined in that. I would like to get your idea on that, having talked to scientists and poets for a long, long time. Do you get the idea that there is some sort of common brain ground in there?
I do. I definitely do. Music used to be taught as a branch of mathematics.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And the biggest connection that I've encountered in my personal life is the music astronomy link. Virtually every astronomer I've ever met plays an instrument or sings with a group. It's and this goes back in history too. Galileo was a musician. Huygens was a musician. Kepler wrote about music. It's joined.
Right, and Einstein was famously a violinist.
The violin.
Or wanted to be, yes.
And at the Harvard Observatory actually had its own in-house orchestra.
Well, and again, one of the things that you can do at many observatories around the country and around the world, I'm sure, is go for a night where they will open up the ceilings where they push pictures of the sky and play it along with music, have a musical accompaniment to stargazing.
And it makes all the sense in the world, I think. Of course, I would.
Let's talk about the fact that you have, what is it, an asteroid named after you? You also have an interest in astrophysics?
I have a strong interest in astronomy, and I've written a lot about history of astronomy. And I started as a science writer working in the Cornell University News Bureau when both Carl Sagan and Frank Drake were on the faculty. So I had a wonderful indoctrination there. And the asteroid is funny. It's if you have a friend who discovers asteroids, you can have an asteroid named after you. It's a very backdoor operation. Comets are named after their discoverers. Big things like planets have to be named by consensus. But discoverers of asteroids really have a lot of clout. And David Levy, who discovered quite a number of them with Gene and Carolyn Shoemaker, is the one I have to thank for being 30935 Dava Sobel.
That's terrific.
Where exactly in the cosmos is it now floating around? Is it in the asteroid belt?
It's in the main asteroid belt. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to think of it as a place where the sun always shines.
Very nice. We'll get back to the musical Innertube in just a moment, but first, let's pause for this soothing musical interlude.
Dava Sobel, former science reporter for the New York Times, has made a career of writing wonderful, humane, readable books about science.
They include Longitude, 1995, a book about John Harrison, a carpenter who invented the marine chronometer, which solved the problem of calculating longitude while at sea. It was made into a 1999 film you might have seen on A&E.
She also wrote Galileo's Daughter, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 2000. Also, A More Perfect Heaven, How Copernicus Revolutionized the Cosmos, in 2011. And in 2016, she wrote The Glass Universe, How the Ladies of the Harvard Observatory Took the Measure of the Stars.
For more on Dava's work, check out her website, www.davasobel, that's DAVASOBEL.com.
And now, more with Dava Sobel, Donna John, and the musical Innertube.
So I think at this point, let's go to the reading section of our session with Dava Sobel. And I can go first because I'm making you two read, so I should read first. So that
you can go first, but I think we should say that you chose all the selections.
That's right. Yes, that's a very good point.
You are the curator in this particular situation, John.
Right. For me to choose, I would offend everyone who had not been chosen.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to be on record that these were not my choices.
Yeah, I thought
but I
that we
approve them.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and
Yes.
I think that's absolutely
And I like
right.
all the poems.
As
So
you,
I would have approved whatever choices you made.
So the first one that I'm going to read is from the September 20th issue of Scientific American. It's written by Simon Armitage, who I know a little bit because I've edited some of his work when I was an editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, so I know Simon's poetry quite well.
Oh, good.
And and this is entitled Ark. It's and speaking of the artwork, Ark is printed next to a lovely sort of dimly lit picture of ferns, and it's just gorgeous, very deep green. They sent out a dove. It wobbled home, wings slicked in a rainbow of oil, a sprig of tinsel snagged in its beak, a yard of fishing line binding its feet. Bring back the leaf. They sent out an Arctic fox. It plotted the bays of the northern fringe in muddy socks and a nylon cape. Bring back the leaf. Bring back the reed and the reef. Set the ice sheet back on its frozen plinth. Tuck the restless watercourse into its bed. Sit the glacier down on its highland throne. Put the snowcap back on the mountain peak. Let the northern lights be the northern lights, not the alien glow over Glasgow or Leeds. A camel capsized in a tropical flood. Caimans dozed in Antarctic lakes. Polymers rolled in the sturgeon's blood. Hippos wandered the housing estates. Bring back the leaf. Bring back the tusk and the horn, unshorn. Bring back the fern, the fish, the frond and the fowl, the golden toad and the pygmy owl. Revisit the scene where swallowtails fly through acres of unexhausted sky. They sent out a boat. Go, little breaker, splinter the pack ice and floes, nose through the rafts and pads of wrappers and bottles and nurdles and cans, the bergs and atolls and islands and states of plastic bags and microbeads, and the forests of smoke. Bring back the leaf. Bring back the river and the sea. And I just want to say one of the things I love about that poem, I mean, this collection that you are curating, David, is so diverse. I just love it. And the people writing it are diverse and the topics are diverse. And this one it owes something to the ballad form and to the song form. You can hear something like a repetend or a chorus going through it. And it's really nice. It goes back to very much older forms of poetry for part of its message and its feel. I just love it.
I'm so glad. And it was exciting because Armitage is the UK National Poet Laureate.
Yes.
So to be able to publish something of his was very exciting.
So I think, David, you are next up. If you want to say a few words about your poem.
Okay.
And true to form, this one's going to be really different.
Yes. So this poem is by Barbara Quick, and she's someone I approached. I had heard a few of her poems on Garrison Keillor's Writer's Almanac, and I wrote to her through her website, and she sent me a few things, but this was my favorite. It's called The Algorithm. Optimization under uncertainty is a field of study in which my grown son will earn his PhD. The math, in his case, concerns the production of wind energy. He reads his papers aloud on the phone to me as a way to optimize their clarity, so that even a layperson, such as myself, can understand what he's saying, in between each beautifully made equation and graph. For me, it's a matter of optimizing my time with him, my only child, who lives so far away and does not get along with the man I married. I'm looking for the algorithm that can minimize the pain entailed for all of us in this awful situation. One needs to account for the inconstancy of the wind's strength and direction, and how best to cant the rotor's turning blades, and how the power produced is affected by the wakes created when lots of turbines are working in concert together. We stay on the phone for hours sometimes, while I fill my sails with the sweet sounds of my son's voice, filled with longing to hold him close again. I admire the choice he's made to apply his gifts in ways that can make the world a better place, even though uncertainty is omnipresent and must be factored in to every calculation.
And that's so different from Simon's poem. I mean, do you want to talk about, it's a very moving poem. Do you want to talk about I have a catch in my throat just hearing you read it.
Good. It gets me every time. That's one,
very personal.
That's one of my tests for all the poems, those. They get me every time. I can read them over and over again, and I feel they still retain their impact. We have had every which sort of poem: free verse, blank verse, villanelle, ghazal, it's limericks, Clara Hughes. I love having the different forms of poetry included, the different spirits, the different scientific topics. I really try to vary that from issue to issue as well, although I'm not sure anyone else notices.
Oh, they notice. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Now, the one that John has asked me to read is a Clara Hugh. Can you tell us what a Clara Hugh is?
Yes, it's a poem that usually makes light of someone's name, and it is named for a person whose middle name was Clara Hugh.
Lucky
enough.
him. Yeah.
Yes. That was Edmund Clara Hugh Bentley, and he initiated this poetic form, but his were usually not about scientists. And I have a good friend at the Linda Hall Library of Science and Technology named Bill Ashworth. So he is a science historian, but his hobby is writing Clara Hughes about scientists.
It's amazing that someone has the hobby of writing Clara Hughes about scientists. I just love it.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say he indulges the hobby all that often, but he's probably written half a dozen of them.
Goodness.
And then he works with an illustrator. In this case, the poems came with the illustrations because he collaborates with an illustrator also at the library. And she creates an illustration. And since each Clara Hugh is very short, she writes it out in calligraphy. So they really make a lovely visual and auditory union.
Well, the Clara Hugh that John has asked me to read, when you look at it on the page of the Scientific American, there are 6 windows here. And he's apparently, Bill Ashworth has collaborated in this case with a woman named Melissa Daner.
Yes, I should have mentioned her name.
She has written a picture, and then on one of the windows, and then the accompanying window has the verses of the poem. So let me just run through it here, and hopefully I'll get all the names right. Here are the 3 people that Ashworth addresses in his Clara Hugh. Sophie Germain had cause to complain when the men in power left her name off the tower. And the picture of her is next to the Eiffel Tower. So,
and indeed, her name was left off the tower.
Yeah. And then the next one is Max von Laue loved his Chihuahua. We learn from his autobiography he invented X-ray crystallography.
That's great. May I interrupt here just to make a comment?
Sure.
because this being Scientific American, everything gets fact-checked. And I received a note about that Clerihew from the fact-checker, just wanting to make sure I knew that there was no evidence that Max von Laue owned a dog.
Well, it's great to know that you have backup.
I am very confident, yes.
He loved his imaginary chihuahua.
Yeah. Whatever.
That's right. I mean, who knows that it was a real chihuahua?
No.
It's not specified, you know.
He could have loved chihuahuas, but not actually had one because he's allergic or something.
You know,
like that.
that's a delightful poem. It's the Clerihews are very, playful. They find the music in names, and the more outlandish the name, the better. And in each case, with these scientists, even with the imaginary chihuahua, you do get an insight into a moment in the scientist's life. So there's an interest there in biography and what makes scientists both peculiar and both the same and different from the rest of us.
Yeah, in Claire Bentley's defense, he did write one of the early ones about Humphrey Davy. And I think it went, Sir Humphrey Davy abominated gravy. He lived with the odium of having discovered sodium.
That's salty dog. Oh, my goodness.
So they're fun,
Yes.
you know.
There's one more here if you'd like to hear it.
Yes, sorry.
James Clerk Maxwell could not play the sax well, but he won raves for his electromagnetic waves. And again, I don't know anything about his saxophone playing.
Probably there's nothing to
So
know.
I don't have any evidence that he played any musical instrument, but, you know.
It's right up there with the imaginary chihuahua.
And I was just
Right.
reading something the other day that was saying that Maxwell, although of course he's very famous, in that breakthrough of discovering electromagnetic waves, really took a step which made tons of 20th century science possible, including Einstein's theories of relativity and even quantum mechanics in some ways, understanding that particles can be both a wave and a field simultaneously. It's amazing that, you know, someone has made this Clerihew about that getting raves, because I read one of the raves for his theory of electromagnetic waves.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
Maxwell himself wrote poetry.
Oh, come on.
Yep.
Really? I was just going to say, you know, that goes back to my earlier question, and that is, as a lay person who dabbled in science long enough to get B's in school to get through, and who loved geometry because there was something solid to hang on to, and algebra just kind of went out of my head. Similarly, I look down at a piano. My son, who is a musician, looks at a piano and plays chords. I look and I say, okay, tell me what you're seeing there. So there are a great number of us that look at science or music or different kinds of art and kind of have to explore to figure out what's there. But poetry comes to just about everybody.
Actually, there are people who are as afraid of poetry as other people are afraid of science.
I'll say.
I've seen it both ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I think that someone was saying to me, by the way, David, that these poems, which appear monthly in Scientific American, the magazine and the website have such a huge reach that it's possible that these are the most read poems in the United States outside of the weekly poems in the New Yorker.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And so that you're bringing it to a lot of people who possibly would not get their daily requirement of poetry or their monthly requirement of poetry otherwise. It's a signal service that you're delivering.
Well, it's my pleasure. I just hope the column continues.
Have any of the poems that you've selected, have there been any controversies aroused? Because I know science is full of those. Disagreements about people, about discoveries. Science gets forward partly because of those disagreements and constant battles over what is true and what is real. I'm wondering if that has come up in any of these selections.
Aside from the Chihuahua.
Yes.
That was an in-house discussion. I have not heard anything. I hear very little from readers who are not poets. Usually if someone writes to me to say, I'm enjoying this so much. It's a poet with a poem to submit. I don't hear from others, and I certainly haven't heard any controversy. And that might be a bad thing. I mean, maybe people are just skipping over that page. I really can't say.
What do you do with the poems that have been submitted to you that don't make the magazine? Do you have a collection of those?
Well, I write back to the poets, and I try to be extremely gentle because I've received my share of rejection letters. And I try to explain why I'm not accepting it. And sometimes that turns into a dialogue. For example, some of the poems just don't say enough about science. They might have a scientific term in the title or in the first line, but then they go off and talk about something else. And I say, you could have this poem published anywhere. We have a high nerd quotient in the readership, and we want these poems to really be about science. And sometimes that has turned into an ultimate success. The poet says, oh, I see what you mean. And then we're good. And sometimes they're too broad. They cover too wide a swath of something. So they just don't work as well as a poem that really focuses on a particular person or thing.
That is one thing that I've noticed in these poems is they arise from a very identifiable nexus between science and sensibility, I guess is what I would say. Barbara Quick's poem, which you read so beautifully, it's got this beautiful balance between talking about a mother's personal life with her son and the engineering of wind farms. And you would have thought, well, the two don't have a connection, but they sure do in this poem.
She made it work. Yeah.
Yes, she made it work. She found a way to do that. And not all the poems are like that, obviously.
Hers is quite unusual.
Yes.
There's usually not so much of a personal statement.
But, I wouldn't give this poem up for anything. I mean, I'm looking at it again and thinking,
good.
Boy, it's such a great poem. And, or the Clara Hues, which are so playful. And I share your hope, that this meter goes on as long as it can, because it's such a wonderful thing. I read Scientific American, obviously,
yes.
every month.
I've been reading it since I was in high school, which is a long time.
Yeah, but John, you get it free.
That's true.
I still maintain my subscription. Life is uncertain.
Right. Uncertainty. Yes.
Good for you.
And Dava, we should have you on a second time so we can talk to you about your novels, which are just this other world that you've created.
I'll take that as a compliment, but they're nonfiction.
And that's what you were nominated for the Pulitzer for, I think, was nonfiction writing.
Well, you can nominate yourself for a Pulitzer.
I didn't know that.
Being nominated is no great shakes, but I was a finalist, so that was very exciting.
Yeah, that meant that people read your book and really liked it. But your books, if you line them up in a row, are just wonderful, and each in its own way, and they're very quirky in what they choose. We get to see Galileo's tragedy from a particular viewpoint. We get to see the triumph of a carpenter who solved the scientific quandary of how to get the longitude that you're at while you're at sea. And we get this great story about women who made some great discoveries in astrology and astroscience, among many other things. And so these are books we ought to talk to you about at some point. They're wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll come back. This is fun.
We'll definitely have you back, Dava. Thank you very much for talking to us today. And I wish I had a poem to end on, but, A man from Nantucket keeps coming into my mind, and I don't want to go in that direction.
I don't
No,
think
don't
one.
go there.
Yes. Dava Sobel, thank you so much for coming to the Musical Innertube, and we hope to have you back soon. This has just been wonderful. And Dava Sobel is the curator of the Meter column in Scientific American, which every month runs a poem that has to do deeply with science.
Thanks for inviting me.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Our lovely little podcast is available everywhere good podcasts are found. Listen on your favorite platform, and if you like what you hear, please give us a good rating.
And spread the word. Tell your friends about the Innertube and let them know they can subscribe to the podcast on our website, musicalinnertube.com.
There you can listen to all of our podcasts, see pictures and biographies of our guests, and contact us. You can even click on the microphone button in the lower right corner to leave us a voicemail.
And don't forget to leave your email address on our Talk to the Tube page so we can stay in touch.
And you can email us directly at musicalinnertube@gmail.com.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.